What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And as always, we have ourselves a lot of volleyball in the world to go on about today, as we are down to 16 teams in the NCAA Women's Volleyball Division 1 tournament. And how about some of these matchups? Penn State outlasting Kansas on the road. And their next opponent is another tough one in Wisconsin. Also, how about Arizona State sweeping Georgia and BYU as they get a familiar foe in Stanford? And how about Nebraska still kicking butt and taking names, even though some people are saying they had a little bit of a scare against LIU, as well as Missouri, as they get a very talented Georgia Tech team, which outlasted Florida in a thriller. Also, we have some NCAA Division 3 women's volleyball to discuss as Juniata, yes, that team, winning the national championship in undefeated fashion. And we have NCAA Division 2 volleyball to discuss, NAIA volleyball to discuss, and some junior college volleyball to discuss. So hand me a volleyball. Set the net, because I'm about to serve up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday afternoon, Monday evening. Either way, you've made your way into episode 223 of Set Point. And without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball action. But first and foremost, Set Point would not be where it's at without IE Sports Radio to provide the platform to go live on Spreaker. Please do follow IE Sports Radio on TikTok, Instagram, and formerly known as Twitter, X, at IE Sports Radio. Also, we have a Facebook page. All you just have to do is type in the word IE, then sports, then radio in the search bar, like us, and then boom. That's how you're able to follow us on Facebook, for those that still use it, by the way. Also, we have a daily updated website, www.iesportsradio.com, for your sports news, our blog, our Hall of Fame, our Fans of the Month, our pages dedicated to each podcast, such as this one, our community forum, and our merchandise shop, because it's getting close to wintertime. If not, it is wintertime, and you need to cop yourself a hoodie. For the past 9 years and counting, IE Sports Radio has been bringing you amazing content ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel, to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country. Thank you to everyone for all of your support and for making IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that is sports. A huge shout out to our sponsor, Planet Jerky Premium Brisket Beef Jerky. Planet Jerky is the official sponsor of IE Sports Radio, and it's the official jerky of the 2022 California League champion Lake Elsinore Storm, the single-A affiliate of the San Diego Padres. This all-brisket jerky has gluten-free options, contains no MSG, no sodium nitrate, it's low in sugar, and high in protein. This is some of the best jerky you can get your hands on, and all you have to do is visit www.planetjerky.net and place your order. And you get free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and prices are slashed for a limited time only. Follow Planet Jerky on Instagram at Planet Jerky, and a huge shout out and thank you once again to Planet Jerky, our sponsor, Premium Brisket Beef Jerky, the jerky that's on a whole other planet. And the way you can follow Set Point on social media is on X at set_point.ie and on Instagram at set_point.iesr. You can follow me, Teran Rodriguez 1, on X, which is where I mainly post my content, and on Instagram at Teran Rodriguez 1992. But I'll post a whole lot on Instagram, just a fair warning. Alright, without any further delay, let's get on into it. So we have a lot of college volleyball to discuss as it is tournament time, ladies and gentlemen. And honestly, we're not just going to go through... We obviously have to go through Division 1. We have to go through Division 1 and its first two rounds. I'm not going to go full on recap on it. I mean, I'm going to give you my full gist of it from the first and second round and give my thoughts on each matchup. So we'll start from top to bottom, starting with Nebraska-LIU. My quick takeaway from this is LIU gave Nebraska all it could handle. They even kind of scared them in the second set, but it's one thing to scare a team, and it's another to actually take a set off them and actually do the unthinkable. And Nebraska was not going to get upset by LIU. I mean, it's great that LIU made it into the tournament, but your reward was getting the number 1 seed. So moving down below, we have Delaware versus Missouri. I forgot to mention Nebraska swept LIU, and Missouri swept Delaware, as Missouri was the 8th seed in the Nebraska region. My takeaway from Missouri is this. The Dawn Sullivan effect is for real, and she has done wonders for the Tigers of Mizzo. It was not too long ago that this team was, I wouldn't say in shambles, but they were nowhere where they wanted to be. They had lots of players transferring out to different schools and players that were graduating, and now they've kind of rebuilt their program, and they made it to the second round. For Delaware, this is kind of what happened with Towson last year. They had to face an SEC team in round 1, and they got the business given to them. But there's no true shame in losing to an improved Missouri team, especially when their head coach is a mastermind, having come from UNLV. Heading down below to Gainesville, Florida, we have Georgia Tech taking down South Alabama in 4 sets. My takeaway for Georgia Tech is this. It's a win, and I'm glad you got on the right foot of the tournament. And honestly, I can't really say anything too negative about it. I mean, it was looking like South Alabama could have forced a 5th set after they won the 3rd set. They were up in set 4 for a little bit, and then Georgia Tech was able to turn on the gas and kind of pull away. For South Alabama, this is kind of going to be a running theme from the Sun Belt Conference teams. They are probably the best Sun Belt Conference team in the NCAA tournament. More on that later. Moving downward, we have Florida sweeping Florida Gulf Coast, and my takeaway for Florida is this. Even though they had multiple players, 3 of their top players out, with Anna Dixon being out, Kira Hudson being out, and Alexis Stuckey being out, I was 95% certain Florida was not going to get upset by Florida Gulf Coast. Florida Gulf Coast is a good team, and they could be a sneaky good team in the NCAA tournament, but against a Florida team that is coached by the Mary Wise, they weren't going to pull off the upset. Next up, we have the Arkansas Regional, or the Arkansas first round matchup, as we had Arkansas sweeping Stephen F. Austin. So Stephen F. Austin was one of last four in teams. And for Arkansas, I kind of figured they would win. Stephen F. Austin, I'll give them some credit. They deserve a little bit of credit for their effort. However, the first set was what really blemished them. They gave it a great effort in that third set, but the first set they lost 25-8, and they actually were the team that scored the fewest amount of points in a set, and that kind of says a little bit about them. And now some people are kind of wondering, was putting Stephen F. Austin in the tournament the correct decision? If you remember, they were upset by Grand Canyon in the WAC tournament in the finals. So now you have to wonder, was this the correct decision on putting this team ahead of teams like UCLA or Duke or NC State or St. John's or any of the other first 8 teams out? And then we got to go into this matchup, TCU versus Florida State. And if you remember from the first meeting, Florida State lost to TCU. I had high hopes on Florida State actually winning this matchup, but TCU wound up beating them in 4 sets, winning it 26-24, 16-25, 25-18, and 26-24. My takeaway for TCU is this. For a team that finished 2 games above 500 and that finished the Big 12 under 500, this team was really impressive, as Melanie Parra led the way with 23 kills, Jalen Gibson 17 kills, and Audrey Knowles 13 kills to go along with 10 digs. My takeaway for TCU is I think they really earned they really deserve to be in the NCAA tournament. And playing in the Big 12 really helped them, as they got a lot of stiff competition in that conference, ranging from the likes of Texas, where they pushed them to 5, to Kansas, which was hosting over the weekend, BYU, which also was hosting. So for TCU, and like I said, they have wins over Florida State, which wound up winning the ACC, and they also beat Hawaii, which is a solid win. It's not really easy to beat them, but they were playing outside of Stan Sheriff Center. But all in all for TCU, they really proved that they belonged in the NCAA tournament. I was a little skeptical of if they deserved it, but for TCU, I was quite impressed by their win over Florida State. For the Noles, they were led by Audrey Koenig, who had 13 kills, while Audrey Rothman had 12 kills, and Sydney Conley had 9 kills. The interesting thing was that Florida State out-hit TCU 263 to 238 and outdug them 61 to 56, and they barely outblocked them by 1, even though the only thing that Florida State got outdone in was service aces, but they only got out-aced by 2. My takeaway for Florida State is this. It seems like this is Groundhog Day for Florida State, and that's not a good thing. I was really hoping that Florida State would actually win this matchup just because, well, this would have been a great redemption matchup, but it kind of paints the whole picture that Florida State, and this is no knock on the Noles, I like them. They had a great run. They won the ACC, or at least shared it with Pitt, but I just think they're not the best NCAA tournament team. And it sucks because I at least had them going to round 2. And I will take a little responsibility. I jinxed them thinking that they were going to go 5 with TCU, but TCU, being the talented team that they are, and them having Melanie Parra, they just straight up got out-muscled and got out-hustled. And they missed a big opportunity to win that match. And losing the first set really does not help either, just because they were up, I want to say 22-20, and then they got outdone late in the set. If not, it was 23-20, and they only scored 1 point after that, and you just can't do that in the NCAA tournament. You just can't. So, all in all for Florida State, it was kind of disappointing, especially since I had high hopes for them on at least advancing to round 2. But I don't think they would have beaten Arkansas. And next up, we have another not disappointing team that I thought was going to win as we head down to Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, in the Rupp Arena, as we had James Madison taking on Baylor, and I was really unimpressed by James Madison. James Madison was the 7 seed. I forgot to mention Florida State was the 6 seed, and James Madison, they were the 6th seed in the Arkansas region, or the Nebraska region altogether. And then James Madison was the 7th seed in the Nebraska region, and as they took on Baylor. And I was very skeptical on if Baylor was going to actually win this match. And Baylor did win it, but they not only won it, they swept him, and they held James Madison to under 20 points, winning it 25-15, 25-19, and 25-19. Baylor was led by Elise McGee, who had 16 kills. She had 519, while Manuela Bibibine had 10 kills, and she hit 533. Baylor as a team hit 422, while James Madison only hit 163 and had no player with double-digit kills. My takeaway for James Madison is this. For a team that was selected as an at-large, I kind of wonder, what in the world was that? And I know James Madison lost to Coastal Carolina in the Sun Belt Conference Tournament Championship. I understand that. But Baylor was not on did not have one of their better years. I thought James Madison was going to come out guns a-blazing, and this kind of reinforced the take that all the Sun Belt teams were disappointing. James Madison was one of them, and they certainly were not better than South Alabama, that's for sure. So for James Madison, I was unimpressed by them, and for them to not even cross 20 in any of the sets, it kind of makes me wonder, what did people see in James Madison what they didn't see in like the other teams that were left out? I'm just baffled by that. But for Baylor, I will say I was wrong about them. I thought they were going to get tripped up in the first round. I thought this was going to be a matchup where James Madison was going to come out guns a-blazing, and Baylor was going to have to bank on Elise McGee having a career game, but for Baylor, they just straight up shut down James Madison. But I got to give credit to Baylor. I was wrong. And honestly, I apologize, Baylor fans. And then the other Lexington, or the other Kentucky quarterfinal, or the Kentucky first-round matchup consisted of Wofford and Kentucky, which Kentucky wound up winning that one in straight sets. I don't really have too much to take away from when it comes to this matchup. I mean, this was kind of be expected from Kentucky. They hit 390, and they outdug Wofford 46-33. So I don't really need to go too much in detail into that. For Wofford, it was great that they won their conference tournament. They beat the Citadel, which was on tear throughout most of the season. But unfortunately, they just ran into a buzzsaw that was Kentucky. And this Kentucky team is still winning. They have not lost since they lost to Tennessee, where they didn't have Regan Rutherford. Staying in the state of Kentucky, staying in the southern region, we have Louisville, as they wound up taking on Wright State in the first round. And if you remember, these two teams faced earlier in the season, where Wright State kind of gave them a scare, almost forced a fifth set, but Louisville wound up winning that one in 4. And this was kind of the same thing. Wright State took the opening set from Louisville 25-22, but then Louisville kicked it up a notch, and they wound up winning the next 3 sets. It was a very ugly match, as Louisville didn't even crack 200 in terms of their hitting percentage. At the same time, Wright State didn't even crack 100, as Wright State hit 84 on the night. So the only thing I'll give Wright State credit for was that they barely outdug Louisville, and Louisville just brought the SWAT team in more blocks. I'll give Wright State this. They really performed well in their conference, but you have to win 3 sets. And this is something Paul Sunderland allotted to on the 5th set. For those that don't have the 5th set on ESPN Plus, get it. This is your time to have it on during this NCAA Women's Volleyball Division 1 Division 1 tournament. You have to win 3 sets. It's one thing to win 1 set against a team that you're not favored to win against, but you have to win 3 sets. And you can't just let up on the gas when it comes to that first set. But I don't think that was the case. I think that was more so of the case of Louisville just being Louisville and being more, more assertive. I think they were more assertive after that first set. And I'll give Wright State credit. They were impressive in that first set, but after that, they kind of just whittled away. And then the match before that was Western Michigan and Auburn, where Western Michigan swept Auburn 3-0. Now, Auburn was actually the 7th seed in this region. However, Western Michigan had other plans and stopped them dead in their tracks. And people are saying that this is an upset. Well, where is the upset? Western Michigan has only lost 2 matches all season, or lost 2 matches all season before that match. And they had won 30 matches that in the regular season, as they were one of 2 teams to have won 30-plus matches, the other being Dayton. So I am not surprised Western Michigan beat Auburn. Auburn was so inconsistent. I know they battled through injuries, but in the SEC, you just can't be consistent. And then jumping down to Nebraska, Omaha, we had Minnesota taking on Utah State. And Minnesota brought out the belt and showed everybody that they are still the real deal, as Minnesota swept Utah State 25-17, 25-14, and 25-23. The first 2 sets, Minnesota looked in the zone. They were so comfortable in those first 2 sets. They never trailed. Then the 3rd set came. Utah State had some sense of urgency, but then Minnesota started to heat up, and they eventually just ran on a blaze of glory to the finish line and won that 3rd set. Minnesota was led by Lydia Grote, who had 10 kills. She also, I think she surpassed 1,000 kills on the season, if not 1,000 kills in her career. Like, they didn't even get up the biggest night from Taylor Landfair, who had only a hitting percentage of 77. She only had 7 kills, and McKenna Wooker had 8 kills. And Minnesota didn't even hit that high of a hitting percentage. They had a hitting percentage of 196. But Utah State hit 48 as they had 4 players hitting negatives in terms of their hitting percentage. And their leading kill leader was Shelby Kaplaunch, who had 12 kills. And my takeaway... Oh, and she also had 10 digs to go along with that as well. My takeaway for Minnesota is this. It really benefits that they played in the Big Ten. They obviously suffered their ups and downs, their slings and arrows, but they were able to basically turn it around in this matchup. And my takeaway for Utah State is this. While their RPI says they're a solid team, you compare them to Minnesota, and you compare their conference to Minnesota, it's practically no contest. I chose Minnesota as an upset for this, but I don't think this is an upset. You have a really good head coach, and you have a lot of good players on this team, like Melanie Schaffmaster, Taylor Landfair, Lydia Grote, Arca Davis, Kylie Murr. She had 17 digs to go along with 2 aces and 7 assists. I don't think this is an ultimate upset, but I'm not surprised by this result. Mikey Two Guns is in the chat room. I forgot to mention the live chat room is up if you're listening live on Spreaker. Marcus Losgreat said salute, and then Mikey Two Guns said, who are your picks to go to the finals in this tournament? If you saw on my Set Point X account, I posted my bracket, but I guess I'll say it again. My bracket consists of Nebraska and Stanford to go to the final. And he says, what's been the game of the tournament so far? I got ESPN Plus now and should be able to watch the replays. Well, I'll be getting into that in a little bit. So hold your horses on that one. Following the Minnesota-Utah State matchup, we had Colgate versus Creighton, and Creighton being the home team in this little mini-regional. Long story short, Creighton brushed away Colgate in straight sets. It was great that Colgate won their conference tournament, but this is a Creighton team that is now at full strength. This is a scary team, and this is kind of a dark horse to go to the NCAA Final Four, if not win it all. And Creighton, it's been a while since they've been at full strength, but now they have Ava Martin back, they have Nora Sis. This team is going to be looking scary good down the stretch. Jumping over to Pullman and going to the Washington State Regional, we had Washington State sweeping Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon was making its first ever NCAA tournament appearance, and unfortunately for the Lopes, they kind of got worked by a team that has a lot of postseason aspirations and has a lot of talented players. And that second set was the window for Grand Canyon to take a set off of Washington State. But unfortunately, that was not the case, as Washington State hit a blistering 375 as Magda Yalashara, I'm going to say it right, I promise you. Magda Yalashravova. I promise you. Magda Yalashvarova. There we go. Yalashvarova. She had herself a monster game, even though it didn't really seem like it. I mean, Iman Isanovic and Pia Timmer were the two-headed monster. So all in all, for Washington State, I will say they just showed why they've been so darn consistent in the top 16. And for Grand Canyon, they have nothing to really be ultimately hang their heads about. This is their first ever NCAA tournament appearance, and this is kind of what happened with the Grand Canyon men's volleyball team. They made their NCAA tournament appearance last spring, and unfortunately they wound up losing to a talented Long Beach State team. And there's no shame in that. So hopefully for their sake they can continue to build off this. And then staying in the Pullman Regional, we had this barn burner of a matchup in the only 5-set matchup in the first round. We had Pepperdine taking on Dayton, Dayton being the 5 seed. I forgot to mention Washington State was the 4 seed against Grand Canyon. Pepperdine, the West Coast Conference champion, took on Dayton, which obviously won their conference, the A10 conference. And Dayton showed why they had won 20 some matches, and they had won 30 plus matches in the regular season, as Dayton wound up outlasting Pepperdine in 5 sets, as Pepperdine needed a semi comeback to win the first set, and then Dayton kind of snatched the second set. Pepperdine won the third set 25-20. Then Dayton blew the doors off of Pepperdine in set 4 25-14. In the fifth set, Dayton jumped out to an 8-4 lead, and they eventually led 12-4 until Pepperdine nearly made a comeback. I unfortunately am bummed out that they kind of were on the wrong end of a violation. I think it was like they got called for touching the ball off of a kill or something. Either way, it was a close net call, and eventually they just couldn't recover from that, as Dayton was led by Lexi Almodovar, who had 19 kills, while Taylor Russell had 15 kills, and Liana Sarkisian had 10 kills. As a team, Dayton hit 246 to Pepperdine's 186, as they were led by Grace Chillingworth, who had 19 kills, while Meg Brown had 10 kills. My takeaway for Pepperdine is this: I just didn't see Pepperdine winning this matchup. They don't have any standout wins. They don't have any big wins that say, oh, hey, this Pepperdine team is actually going to be a threat. And while they did win the West Coast Conference, that team only had one team advancing to the NCAA tournament, being Pepperdine. The others were LMU, which was one of the first 8 out, and then San Diego was a complete flat tire from last year, even though they weren't ultimately that bad. But all in all for Pepperdine, it doesn't help that they had that conference being very down this year, and they didn't have too many standout-ish wins, if not any. So I kind of see why Pepperdine lost this one, but give credit to Dayton. They showed up in that 5th set. They jumped out to an early lead, and they never looked back. Jumping down to the Yinzer land, we have the Pittsburgh Regional, as we had USC taking on UMBC. USC being the 8th seed, taking on UMBC, the Terriers, or the Golden Retrievers. And long story short, USC brought, even though they weren't, their star player, Skylar Fields, was not at 100%, they really showed up and showed out, as they wound up sweeping UMBC. My takeaway for SC is this: even though Skylar Fields was nowhere near 100%, she had 10 kills, and it was pretty much darn right impressive. And it helped that she got some help with Kalia Williams, Lindsay Miller, Tyra Ariel. But I was wondering what happened with London Wijay. She had 6 kills along with Kalia Williams, Lindsay Miller, and Tyra Ariel. So it kind of helps that USC has a good future ahead of them, but Skylar Fields needed all the help that she can get, because she was clearly not 100%, and she kind of missed the last few matches in Pac-12 play. For UMBC, there's nothing to be ashamed of. You lost to an SC team which had been battle-tested throughout 99% of the season, and that went through a whole lot of hardships here and there. Jumping over to the host team, Pitt, taking on Coppin State. Pitt was able to sweep Coppin State, and there's nothing really to take too much away from. This was Coppin State making their first ever NCAA tournament appearance, whereas Pitt was very, very much experienced. They had a lot of talent, even though most of it was young, with Olivia Babcock and Tori Stafford leading the way. Both are being freshmen. And Pitt just basically showed Coppin State who's boss. There's nothing that really needs to be said from this. Next up, we head down to the land of the Cheeseheads, as we head to the Madison Regional, as Wisconsin hosted Jackson State. And long story short, Wisconsin really blew away Jackson State. And I wasn't ultimately surprised by this. This is a Wisconsin team that has Anna Smrek back. They have Sarah Franklin, the Big Ten Player of the Year, playing at a high level. For those that don't know Sarah Franklin's story, she actually got a note. She had a little health scare in June, and it was looking like that she wasn't going to be playing volleyball ever again. But then she got the green light to basically to go back to practice, and Sarah Franklin is now the Big Ten Player of the Year, and she is leading to Wisconsin to greater heights. So nothing really needs to be taken away from that matchup. It's just that Wisconsin was just a much better team. Jackson State coming out of its conference, it did all that it could, but they were not slowing this train down. The other Wisconsin regional consisted of Miami of Florida beating Northern Iowa, the 8th seed, in 4 sets. My takeaway for Miami is this. They were one of the last 4 teams in, and for a team that was a last 4 team in, and for a team that wound up losing to Boston College in its final game of the regular season, it really impressed. Although Grace Lopez had to play Superwoman as she had 30 kills and she had a hitting percentage of .531, she was just downright impressive. And she also had 9 digs. Miami hit 311 to Northern Iowa's 188 as Northern Iowa was led by Kira Fowler, who had 18 kills, while Olivia Tajernagol, who had 11 kills, and Emily Holterhaus had 10 kills. My takeaway for Northern Iowa is this. For a team that beat Florida State last year, you would think they would have a little bit more success against another ACC team from Florida, but I just was a little disappointed in Northern Iowa. I know they had one of their top players go off for 30 bleeping kills, but holy crud, I didn't really expect this. But I guess this shows that Miami is just so battle-tested, having to play the likes of Georgia Tech and Louisville and Florida State and Pitt. So for Miami, this was kind of I think that loss to Boston College kind of was their wake-up call, saying, we are much better than this, and you can't just underestimate us. Heading on down to the Kansas Regional, we had Penn State taking on Yale, the Ivy League taking on the Big Ten, and this was the Battle of the Blues in my opinion, and long story short, Penn State was able to bring out the paddling stick, although they had a little bit of trouble as the second set they ran to some choppy waters as Yale took that second set 25-23 after losing the first set 25-17, but then Penn State righted the ship and wound up winning sets 3 and 4, 25-22 and 25-16, hitting a blistering 373. My takeaway for Penn State is this. It's a win, and tournament wins are not going to be easy to come by, especially when they're not on your home floor. And for Yale being the Ivy League's representative, I will say this. This was probably one of the better efforts I've seen from a non-Power 5 school or a team that wasn't even remotely close to being ranked. So I gave a lot of kudos to Yale, but against Penn State, they would have needed to play practically perfect. And then going over to Kansas and Omaha to close out the Kansas Regional. I'll say this about Kansas. They were for real, and Omaha making its first ever NCAA tournament appearance, unfortunately just had a very sour welcome to the tournament as Kansas swept them. I will give credit to Omaha. They held Kansas to under 200 in the hitting percentage department, and Omaha almost took a set off of Kansas as they narrowly lost the third set 28-26. They even had a set point, but unfortunately for Kansas, they, being the very talented team that they are, very consistent team that they are, they were able to basically hold them off and get the sweep. Heading on down to West Lafayette, we had Purdue taking on Fairfield, and we don't really need to discuss this matchup too much as Purdue brought out the belt and spanked Fairfield quite a bit, hitting 478 on the night and sweeping Fairfield. Again, nothing to really go over. It's just that Purdue was just on one in that match, and they were not slowing down for anybody. And the matchup following that, or before that one, was Marquette, the 6th seed, taking on Eastern Illinois, and this one was just as one-sided as the other, as Marquette swept Eastern Illinois, hitting a blistering 362 and outblocking them 11-2. And they also had 9 service aces. So for Marquette, it was great to see them bounce back from their loss from St. John's, and that's how it went. Heading on down to Eugene, Oregon, we had the Oregon Regional as we had Iowa State taking on Hawaii, and I will just say I may be a little bit Big West biased, but for Hawaii, I knew they were going to win this matchup. They got blown out in the first set 25-16, but they made a comeback in that second set, won it 26-24. They were comfortable in that third set. They won it 25-18, and then set 4, it looked like it was going to go 5, but Hawaii, being the talented team that they are, won that fourth set 25-23 as Kaylin Alexander led the way with 18 kills, while Amber Igidi had 14 kills. Riley Wagner had 9 kills. And even though they were outdug 73-70, Hawaii, a.k.a. Manoa Roofing Company, had a block party going on as they had 13 blocks to Iowa State's 5. And while they were out-aced, they still brought pressure as they hit, and they still had a better hitting percentage, hitting 276 to Iowa State's 186. Maya Duckworth led Iowa State with 15 kills, while Alexis Angelbrecht had 13 kills, and Nayeli Gonzalez had 12 kills. My takeaway for Iowa State is this. I knew they were going to have a tough matchup with Hawaii. Hawaii is a much better team than most people think that they are. And Hawaii, for those that forgot, they were actually ranked, as they were ranked for about 1 week, and then sadly they wound up getting the tires popped off, and unfortunately, courtesy of Liberty, mind you, that was that for them being ranked. So, all in all for Hawaii, I knew, as someone who had recently saw them, I knew Hawaii was going to be guns a-blazing, but I also knew that Iowa State was also going to give them a battle since they've had some success against Big 12 teams, but Hawaii was just on a whole other level that match following that first set. Heading down to Austin, Texas, we had Texas taking on Texas A&M, and this goes back to what Paul Sunderland said in the fifth set, which is a program on ESPN+. You need to win 3 sets, not 1. Texas A&M won the first set 25-21 as they controlled that set for the most part, but Texas was angry. They jumped out to a 10-0 lead, took that second set 25-13, had a little bit of trouble in set 3, but took it 25-20 and wound up winning the fourth 25-20. It wasn't the prettiest match for Texas, but my takeaway for them is this. They have not lost a first-round matchup in the NCAA tournament. As I want to say they were at 36-0 in first-round matches. And that's kind of the MO of Texas. And you have to give credit to Jarrett Elliott and all the past coaches that have basically done their thing with the University of Texas. For Texas A&M, this is another last 4 in team. But I will say they at least took a set off of Texas. I was going to say that they didn't deserve to be in. But how many would have liked to have seen maybe a Long Beach State or a UCLA, even though Long Beach State wasn't even in the first 8 out. But how many would have liked to have seen like maybe a UCLA play a Texas? Not saying that Texas A&M did not deserve to be in, but remember, this is a Texas A&M team that lost to Alabama, which had not won a conference game. So I'm not saying Texas A&M didn't deserve to be in, but it would have been a little nicer if they had maybe followed up on that first set. But this just goes back to what Paul Sunderland said. You have to win 3 sets, not 1, not 2. Staying in the Lone Star State, we had another Texas versus Texas matchup as we had SMU sweeping Texas State. And this goes back to what I was saying about the Sun Belt Conference earlier. Not one Sun Belt Conference made it out of the first round, and only one Sun Belt Conference team won a set. For Texas State, this is another one of those teams where I was surprised that they got in. I guess that the Sun Belt Conference has something that maybe other teams in other conferences don't have. So I will say this about Texas State. It's good that they got back into the NCAA tournament, but they faced a talented SMU team coming off of a solid win over Pepperdine. I think people forgot that SMU did play a match as they closed out American Athletic Conference play early, winning that one fairly I wouldn't say fairly easily, but winning the regular season conference, and then there was no conference tournament, and they ended a week early as they got to schedule one more match being against Pepperdine, and they wound up easing past Pepperdine, which was kind of a good precursor to this matchup. Heading down to the music state in Tennessee, we had Western Kentucky taking on Coastal Carolina. This is another one of those Sun Belt Conference teams that unfortunately did not do much. I will make a case for Coastal Carolina. They were facing the 6th seed. Western Kentucky has been so darn consistent, and they have Paige Briggs, who is just a powerhouse. But unfortunately, Western Kentucky swept Coastal Carolina. My takeaway for Western Kentucky is this: Paige Briggs is on one, and this team basically is her. She is basically the entire Western Kentucky team. And Kaylee Cox also did a great job of relieving pressure for her. For Coastal Carolina, I will say this: Jalen Stout is still a talented player. They don't have anything to hold their heads down on. Winning the Sun Belt Conference tournament is no easy feat. And they almost took a set off of Western Kentucky. And I will give Coastal Carolina another bit of credit. They did hit 330, but Western Kentucky hit 478, and the defense just was not there for Coastal Carolina. And then for the host, Tennessee, they wound up sweeping High Point. Nothing really needs to be said about this, except Tennessee had a nice bounce-back game after that disastrous 3-set loss to South Carolina. For Tennessee, this is kind of another dark horse team that could make it to the NCAA Final Four at the very least. It's good that they have a solid team back, and after last year where they got bounced in the first round by Purdue in 5 sets, it's good to see that they were able to get a nice solid win on their home floor, hitting a blistering 398 to boot as well, and they outdug their opponent 48-30. Heading on down to snowy old Provo, we had BYU taking on Weber State, and there's not much that needs to be taken away from this, except BYU is still a force to be reckoned with on its home floor, which is what I would normally say, except BYU almost allowed Weber State to take a set off them. But BYU was able to wake up sooner rather than later in that set, and they wound up taking the third set 27-25. All in all for BYU, they just showed why they've been somewhat consistent throughout most of the season. They have had their inconsistencies, but they did not show it against Weber State, except in that third set. And then we had this matchup before the BYU-Weber State match. We had Georgia versus Arizona State, and let me just say, this was one of the more interesting matches, but Arizona State did not want to have any part of an interesting match, as Arizona State straight up smoked Georgia, hitting a blistering 427 in hitting percentage. And even though they were outdug, they doubled them up in blocks 10-5. And Marta Levinska, she is her for Arizona State. And Jelly Cyril also aided her with 10 kills as well. So for Arizona State, as long as those two are clicking and they get some other contributions like Shannon Shields, I think this Arizona State team could be another dark horse. Finally, closing out the first round was the Stanford Regional, and we had the 8th seed Houston taking on UC Santa Barbara, and this is kind of one of those matches where I thought UC Santa Barbara was going to be a lock, as they took the first set, but they wound up, I wouldn't say not showing up for the second set and the third set and so on, but Houston did not have too many problems following the second set, as Santa Barbara took set 1 25-21, Houston took set 2 25-23, and then they took sets 3 and 4 25-16 and 25-18, as Houston was led by Kenna Sauer, who had 18 kills, while Abby Jackson had 16 kills, and Nena Bonu had 12 kills with 0 hitting errors. Oh, and also Houston outdug UC Santa Barbara by 8. And the blocks were kind of close, as Houston outblocked Santa Barbara 10-9.5. The glaring stat, however, from this match are the aces, as Houston had 8 while UC Santa Barbara had 1, which is very concerning because Santa Barbara does pride themselves on being a good serving team. And my takeaway for Santa Barbara is this. I really think they kind of fell off after the Long Beach State loss. I think they kind of got broken after Long Beach State beat them in the Big West Conference Tournament. And that says a lot about the Gauchos. And it's sad because this team had, other than the Long Beach State loss, they had one other bad loss, which was to UC Irvine. But in the Big West, it's so tough to go undefeated. You can quote that from Daniel Gilman, my guest from the season opener of Set Point of Season 5. But for Santa Barbara, I was a little disappointed in them. I thought they were going to at least take this 1-5, but sadly they didn't, and it's just... There's a reason why they were one of the last 4 teams in. I'm starting to see why they were a last 4 team in, and I'm starting to see why the committee was 50-50 on putting them in. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. I think they had a great year, only losing 5 matches, winning the Big West Conference regular season, having some good wins. But you look at some of their wins. Their 2 of their wins came against Hawaii. Good. They beat Pepperdine. Good. They beat Iowa State. Good. They also beat Utah. Solid. But they didn't really have that true breakout win, which was a statement win, which had teams saying, Santa Barbara could be a threat. But unfortunately, they just didn't. Their best win, in my opinion, was probably against Iowa State in straight sets, which was followed up by getting swept by Drake, which is currently in the NIVC. All right, that is it for round 1. Round 2 started off with Nebraska. Going from top to bottom, we had Nebraska sweeping Missouri. And this is kind of like the first matchup from Nebraska, as they kind of got a scare from LIU, but they weathered the storm and took the 3rd set against Missouri. This was no surprise, as Nebraska wound up beating the brakes off of Missouri. And I will say this about Missouri, they don't have anything to hang their heads over. This was the first season of Don Sullivan, and this season has a lot of promise for them. And I really think that they will be able to come back and basically make a name for themselves in the SEC. They're now picking up the pieces, and they are looking rather legit. As Davidson Crooks and Patty Backs are popped in the chat room, Davidson Crooks says, "What's good?" And then Patty Backs says, "I'm here, sorry I'm late." Aw, it's no worries, Patty. Next up, we had probably the match of the first weekend, as Mikey Two Guns actually asked, well, it's been the game of the tournament so far, and I think this is the one. Georgia Tech versus Florida. So this matchup was everything and more, as Florida won the first set 25-22. Georgia Tech won a thriller of a second set, winning it 30-28. They didn't even allow Florida to have a set point in set number 2. Then Georgia Tech jumped out to an early lead and never relinquished it, winning set 3, 25-21. Then in set 4, Florida took it 25-18, and then Georgia Tech was down 8-4 in set number 5, as it looked like there was going to be a side switch, but then there wasn't. And then eventually it was a side switch, and it looked like Florida was going to put their foot on the throat against the Yellow Jackets, but the Yellow Jackets dug their way out of a, what was it? I think it was like a 13-12 deficit. And I think, they were down 13-11. They scored the next 3 points. Florida saved a set point. And Bianca Bertolino, not Bertoloni, Bertolino, she had the match-clinching kill, as she is someone that is everything and more for Georgia Tech. Considering they had to graduate Julia Bergman, Bianca Bertolino is her. She is the new her for Georgia Tech, as she had 18 kills to go along with 17 digs, and she also had a service ace and a block. Tamara Otene, yes, her name is pronounced Otene. I've been pronouncing Otene, and let's just say I'm not good with last names. Tamara Otene had 21 kills to lead Georgia Tech. Larissa Mendez had 11 kills, and Afedo Manyang had 10 kills. For Florida, They were led by Kennedy Martin, who had 21 kills. She had 306. AC Fitzpatrick, 16 kills and 2 service aces. Her serves are just booming, by the way. Gabby Essex had 12 kills, and Sofia Victoria had 10 kills. This was definitely the match of the second round, and probably the match of the weekend. And unfortunately for Florida, they were on the wrong side of the scoreboard, but they have nothing to be sad over. But this is one of those matchups where they really wish they had Anna Dixon, Alexis Stuckey, or Kira Hudson. But unfortunately, that's just how things work. And sadly, this isn't Madden where you can turn off injuries. But I will say this for Florida, they were rather impressive to say the least, and they have nothing to hang their heads over. They will be back more often than not. And with Kennedy Martin, they are for sure going to be a force to be reckoned with. Heading on down to Arkansas, we have TCU versus Arkansas, and Arkansas took the first 2 sets, 25-18 and 25-17, or 27-25, and then TCU wound up snagging the third set, 25-23, but then Arkansas reclaimed control over the match, wound up winning set 4, 25-20. My takeaway for Arkansas is this: Jill Gillen and Taylor Head are them. And Maggie Cartwright also contributed as well. She definitely was a big X factor. She hit 350, and she also had 14 digs. Both teams had 79 digs, as both teams were very prolific. Even though Arkansas was more prolific in hitting the ball, they had hit 253. TCU has nothing to hang their heads over, as Audrey Knowles had 17 kills, Melanie Parra 14 kills, and Jalen Gibson 12 kills. All in all for TCU, again, it was a great season for them. They got into the NCAA tournament. They upset Florida State, which I think was a massive upset, even though they beat them earlier in the season. And it just goes to show that TCU had that edge over Florida State. And then the quick takeaway for Kentucky Baylor is this: Kentucky is a flaming runaway train that is not going to be slowing down for anybody. For Baylor, on the other hand, this is kind of where the buck stopped. It was great that they beat James Madison, but they were not going to slow down Kentucky unless Kentucky was going to have an off night. And Baylor, unfortunately, just was bounced in this round. But they have nothing to be ultimately ashamed of, but they just were outmatched against Kentucky. And the same can be said for Louisville versus Western Michigan and Creighton versus Minnesota. Creighton looked comfortable against Minnesota, while Louisville took the wind out of Western Michigan's sails following that first set. Western Michigan gave everything and more to Louisville that they could handle, but sadly Louisville, after that first set, winning a tight first set, they were able to storm past them throughout most of the way. And Creighton was kind of the same thing against Minnesota. But I will say Minnesota deserves a lot of credit for their season. Some kind of ridiculed them, wondering if they're going to make the tournament. I knew they would, as long as they got to 500 or finished 500. And the third set, Minnesota really kind of made Creighton sweat a little. But Creighton, having the likes of Nora Sis and Ava Martin and Ellie Bickelmeyer, they just were not slowing down for anybody. And Ellie Bickelmeyer, I didn't even know who that was. I'm like, Bickelmeyer? Is that the name of a Dr. Seuss character? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Jokes aside, Creighton has a three-headed monster in Nora Sis, Ava Martin, and Ellie Bickelmeyer. And if I'm Louisville, they're not going to be expecting, and that is not an easy matchup to contain. Not saying that Louisville is going to lose, but Creighton is not going to be any pushover. Next up, we have Dayton versus Washington State in Pullman, and I will just say Washington State took the first 2 sets very easily, didn't even trail in any of those sets, and then Dayton kind of got off to a fast start, and like I said, they weren't ready to land just yet. Quote unquote, they were the Flyers. But then Washington State, this was the match of runs for them. They got off to a little bit of a run. They were not looking back as they took the fourth set, 25-16. And my takeaway for Washington State is this: Magda Yalasharova is her. She hit 750 and she had 15 kills. 750. Magda, crown her. And she also had 10 blocks. She had 9 block assists and 1 solo stuff. So she had a double-double. Pia Timmer also had a double-double in terms of kills and digs with 12 and 11 respectively. And Iman Isanovic had 11 kills. Dayton was led by Taylor Russell, who had 15 kills, while Lexi Almodovar had 11 kills to go along with 15 digs. And my takeaway for Dayton is this: nothing to ultimately be ashamed of. You had such a phenomenal year. Unfortunately, you just were cooled off rapidly by Washington State, who had been battle-tested throughout 95% of the season. Next up, we had USC taking on Pitt in the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse, and long story short with this, again, this goes back to what Paul Sunderland said. You gotta win 3 sets, not 2 and not 1. USC won the first set in comeback fashion, rallying back from 22-20 down to win the first set 25-23, but that seemed to be Pitt's wake-up call, as Pitt was actually down 16-12 in set 2, but really turned on the Jets as they won that second set 25-20, and they won the third set 25-18, as well as the fourth set by that same score. My takeaway for Pitt is this: as long as they don't get off to a slow start, this is going to be a team that no one wants to play, though I don't think Washington State is going to back down from this challenge, as Olivia Babcock and Tori Stafford, they are the future for Pitt, and this is going to be a very fun future for the Panthers. For USC, my takeaway for them is this: when Skylar Fields has half of your kills, you know she had to carry the team. She was far from 100%, and she also had 10 digs to boot as well. Now USC is kind of in an interesting situation where they no longer have Skylar Fields. They're going to have to bank on some of their other players, such as London Wajay, who I think they should have gotten more involved in. As remember, this is a player that graduated early, 1 year early from high school, to go train with USC and eventually get to play on the team. But sadly, that is not the case. But sadly, they didn't really utilize her all that much, and it sucks because I thought USC could have utilized her as well as the other players, such as Tyra Ariel. And yeah, Tyra Ariel was kind of their next kill leader with 6 kills. USC had 42 kills overall, and Skylar Fields, like I said, she had half of those with 21. Next up, we head on over to Lawrence, Kansas, as Kansas and Penn State played against one another in the round of 32 matchup, and this is why I picked this as my round of 32 match of the day, as Penn State outlasted Kansas in 5 sets, and they won off of a walk-off service ace from Maddie Bilinovich, who also had 3 service aces, so kind of fitting that she had the match-clinching service ace, aka the walk-off service ace. My takeaway for Penn State is this: winning on the road in that environment is not easy, and the fact that they did that is very impressive. Penn State has had its ups and downs, but the fact that they went into Lawrence, Kansas, wound up beating the Jayhawks is downright impressive. For Kansas, my takeaway is this: Reagan Cooper and London Davis were both on their A game, as Cooper also hit .464. They also had Michaela Myers having 8 kills and not having any hitting errors. She hit .533. Kansas as a whole hit .294. They gave everything they could that Penn State could handle and more. But the problem was they got outblocked and they got outdug, and unfortunately they just fell short. And it sucks to lose off of a walk-off service ace. If you're the winning team, it's epic to win off of a walk-off service ace. But if you're on the other side of the walk-off service ace, your heart just gets ripped out, and it's just heartbreaking. Next up, we have the West Lafayette matchup with Purdue beating Marquette in 4 sets. It looked like Marquette was going to force a 5th set, as they actually led for a nice chunk in set 4, but Purdue, having the likes of Eva Hudson, Raven Colvin, and Chloe Chicoine, that is not going to be anyone that's going to be going down that easily. Oh, and I also need to mention Maddie Skemahorn. It's actually pronounced Skemahorn, not Skirmerhorn. I'm mixing her up with the beach volleyball player. Maddie Skemmerhorn had the walk-off ace, and she had a whopping 25 digs. And Marquette also had 2 players with 20-plus digs. Purdue was basically one step ahead of Marquette throughout a good portion of the match. Even though all the sets were tied, well, first set, it was mainly Purdue, just as they never trailed and weren't tied. But my takeaway from Marquette is this. They proved themselves that they did belong in this tournament, and I was very impressed by them. Unfortunately, the magic kind of ran out for them, as unfortunately they ran into a hotter Purdue team, which has a 3-headed monster. So, sadly, they were not going to be winning that matchup anytime soon, and it's a bummer because it would have been awesome to have another 5-setter in the round of 32, but that's just how it is. And then the quick takeaway for Oregon versus Hawaii is this. Oregon got off to a little sluggish start, and I forgot to mention Oregon took down Southeastern Louisiana in straight sets. But I will also just say Oregon is that team. Oregon almost allowed Hawaii to take the first set. Hawaii actually led by, I want to say, double digits, or close to double digits, but to the credit of Oregon, they were able to rally back and win the first set 25-23, and that was the window for Hawaii to make that a match. They got the Long Beach State treatment from the Big West Conference Tournament Championship. They lost the close set, and then the rest of the way, Hawaii just had no answer for Oregon. And it's nothing to be ashamed of if you're Hawaii, but they knew they were going to be in for a rough ride against the Ducks because the two already played earlier in the season at Stan Sheriff Center in Week 1 with Oregon sweeping Hawaii. And then for Texas SMU in Gregory Gymnasium, long story short, Texas was not going to lose at Gregory Gymnasium. There's a reason why this team doesn't really lose a whole lot in Gregory Gymnasium. Your team either has to be really good or you have to catch them on an off night. But for Texas, I will just say they are still the reigning champs, and they are still that team. If anyone that wants to discredit them or count them out, do so at your own risk. But if Texas gets hot at the right time, they could be, hence the word could, possibly be making a push to repeat. And then I had my lock of the second round on December 2nd, aka Saturday, which was Tennessee versus Western Kentucky, and Tennessee swept Western Kentucky. Although it was closer than expected, I will say I was confident that Tennessee was going to win, even though the third set was kind of a nail-biter, but Tennessee, being the talented team that they were, they actually served efficiently. They had 7 aces to only 4 service errors. They outdug their opponent by 11. They outblocked their opponent by 3. They hit 302 to 221 to the other team. And Tennessee was just efficient. Not that Western Kentucky wasn't efficient with Kaylee Cox and Paige Briggs having solid nights, but Tennessee having Janasia Moore and Morgan Fingal, they were on one. I also expect them to get Erica Lovett involved soon. I mean, I know she didn't have the best night, but soon. Soon she will have her game. Moving on from that matchup, we had probably the more surprising result, as we had Arizona State sweeping by BYU, and a long story short is this. Arizona State is the most improved team from this entire season. If you compare last year's Arizona State team to this year's, it's just not a good, it's like comparing apples to oranges. Marta Levinska had 17 kills, only 1 hitting error, and she hit .533 to go along with 10 digs. Jelly Sear had 9 kills, and then Roberta Rebello had 8 kills. If Arizona State gets production from her, they're going to be a tough team to stop. Arizona State hit 301 to BYU's 186. And remember, Arizona State wound up winning in BYU, in Provo, in Smith Fieldhouse. It's not an easy place to win at. BYU was led by Erin Livingston, who had 10 kills, while Kate Pryor had 7 kills, along with Whitney McCowan Larenas. My takeaway for BYU is this. I think their inconsistency really showed in this match. And that's no knock on them and the good job that they've had all season, but as I said, if they struggled against teams like Kansas State, they were not gonna do well against some of the bigger and better teams and the more physical teams. And for Arizona State, they did everything correct to win that match. And then lastly, we had the kind of surprising match of the weekend. Stanford going 5 sets with Houston, and hang on just a sec. Sorry, allergies are killing me. But Stanford took the first 2 sets, 25-15 and 25-20. Houston took the next 2 sets by scores of 25-22. But then Stanford got off to an early start, a hot start. Houston did tie it up at 5-5, but then Stanford eventually kind of ran away with it, winning the 5th set 15-7. It was a block party for Stanford, as I said on Twitter or X. Maples Roofing Company was on one in that 5th set, courtesy of Kendall Kipp. Aaliyah Rubin had 23 kills and 12 digs. Katie Baird, 16 kills, along with Kendall Kipp, who also had 16 kills. And then Sammy Francis also had 12 kills. And a win's a win for Stanford, but they just can't be lulled into a false sense that they are going to crush their opponent. They got to continue to go for the throat and just shut the door on their opponent. For Houston, Kenna Sauer led the way with 24 kills, and Abby Jackson had 15 kills. My takeaway for Houston is this: nothing to be ultimately ashamed of. I said that this was going to be a little bit more grueling of a matchup than it appears to be on paper. And if you remember last year, Houston's season ended at the hands of Stanford in straight sets in the Sweet 16. This time these two teams met in the round of 32, and I will just say Houston gave everything that they could that Stanford could handle and more. Unfortunately, Stanford just had a little bit more in the tank. All right, but that is that for the first 2 rounds. I honestly did not expect it being 1 hour and 6 minutes already. But let's quickly go over the NIVC as the quarterfinalists, or the Great 8 that remains in the NIVC, or the National Invitational Volleyball Championships, are Wichita State, which beat Arkansas State and Tulsa in the first 2 rounds. Drake, which beat Southern Illinois and DePaul in the first 2 rounds. Montana State, which wound up beating Pacific and Sacramento State. Then Wyoming, which wound up beating South Dakota and Northern Colorado. Then we have South Florida, which wound up beating Buffalo and St. John's. I'm sorry, Patty. And then we have Georgia Southern, the lone Sun Belt Conference team that actually is doing well in the postseason. Yes, shots fired. They took down Winthrop and East Carolina. And then we have UTEP, which took down North Texas and UT Arlington. And lastly, we have the lone Power 5 conference team in the NIVC, Clemson, which took down Eastern Kentucky and Ball State. The Great 8, the Great 8, that's actually what it's called. The Great 8 is actually tomorrow, which is pretty cool if you ask me. And then the Fab 4 is from December 7th through December 10th, and then the championship ranges from December 10th through December 12th. So it could be as late as next Tuesday or as early as next Sunday. But that's going to quickly do it for the NIVC. If I had to guess on who was going to win that, I'd probably say Clemson, just because the last 2 NIVC winners were from the ACC, courtesy of Boston College and Georgia Tech. And there was actually a nice little interview from my good buddy Daniel Gilman on his volleyball show, 6 Rotations, regarding that whole thing. And honestly, I would like to see the NIVC get more national recognition. I would honestly advocate to have the NIVC promoted more for teams to basically participate in it, like a UCLA or a Long Beach State or any of those other teams that missed out on the NCAA tournament, like maybe Indiana, just to name a few. Like Indiana probably could have done wonders in this tournament, and who knows, maybe we could have gotten them national recognition on a televised network. But I digress. All right, but that's going to do it for the NIVC recap. We're going to take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we got some NCAA Division 2 and Division 3 volleyball to discuss, and we got some NJCAA and some 3C2A to discuss, and then we'll circle it back to NCAA Division 1 women's volleyball. Keep it locked here. You are listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, sports fans. It's me, your boy Larry B, and I want to walk you through the world of sports. No, not just the mainstream major TV deal type sports, although those are important too. But let me be your guide through your journey of all sports, from college to the pros, the minors, and everything in between. Each week, we are talking sports galore with true diehards just like you from a hardcore fan's perspective that's sure to quench your thirst around leagues you may know all too well and some you may even discover here. That's right, sports fans. If you love sports of all kinds, enjoy hearing amazing sports stories, and respect all sports because you know how difficult any of them can be to play or compete in, then this is your show. Join me, your boy Larry B, on the defining moment each week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports, and let the sports come to you.
Hello, ladies and sinners. Hello, sports fans around the world. Hello, IE Sports family. This is Cale Henderson, the host of IE Vegas, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio. If you folks are interested in sports in the Vegas area, if you're wanting to have a blast for 1 hour, every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this is a show built for the Vegas sports fans, where we feature the Las Vegas Raiders, the Las Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Aces, and the University of Las Vegas, Nevada Rebels. Hopefully, fingers crossed, MLB team coming soon. Either way, if you folks are looking to have a blast for 1 hour each and every week, tune in Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you folks are interested in Vegas sports news, go to our Twitter, at SinCities_IESR, and you can speak with me, the host, Cale Henderson, at Cale_Henderson on Twitter. At any time, be happy to reply. Always want to reach out to our fans. Again, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernan, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed All That Sports. Check out all of our amazing shows as they go live on several different days. Well, let's get up back into the volleyball action. So, I don't know if you all know this, but I actually am a co-host for 3 and Out College Edition, where Larry B, we could always just talk about NCAA Division I football and the FBS, where it's like the Georgias, the Michigans, the Alabamas, the what, and all that sort of thing. But we talk all things college football, whether it's from NCAA FBS, NCAA Division II, NCAA Division III, NAIA, 3C2A, which is junior college in California, and then NJCAA, which is junior college all over the place. We discussed that. And then that kind of gave me the idea of, you know what? Why don't I get all the other the volleyball scenes involved in terms of college volleyball? And I mean, I did discuss high school volleyball. We also discussed high school football on 3 and Out College Edition. But I discussed high school volleyball on Set Point, so we might as well go over some of the lower levels. I mean, I could just make this show all about NCAA Division I, but I'm not about that life. So let's discuss a little bit of NCAA Division III action. So, long story short, Juniata, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, I apologize, but Juniata wound up winning the NCAA Division III National Championship, as the NCAA tournament was rather got an earlier start than normal, which is why I was so mad that I could not discuss any of this from last week, as I was pressed for time. As the regionals were from November 16th through November 18th, quarterfinals were on November 29th, semifinals were on November 30th, and the championship, the Division III championship, was on December 2nd. So unlike the Division I volleyball bracket, there are actually 8 regionals, which I think are pretty cool. And then if you win your regionals, you get put into the final 8 seed list, where the committee seeds the teams from 1 through 8, and then you get the hand that you're dealt. So even if you are the number 1 seed overall, or if you're undefeated, you're still not guaranteed to being the 1 seed in terms of the whole tournament. And even if you are the 1 seed in terms of the final 8 seed list, you're not guaranteed to win it all, as, believe it or not, Claremont Mud Scripps actually upset the top seed Wisconsin Oshkosh in straight sets, which is very surprising. But they wound up losing to Hope in 5 sets, and Hope eventually wound up losing to Juniata. And you want to know what's so special about this Juniata team? They actually wound up going undefeated throughout the entire season, which is downright impressive. So we've already had an NJCAA team go undefeated, albeit that was in Division II, but this Juniata team, they went undefeated, and if I recall correctly, they did not have one match going 5 sets, as they only dropped 6 sets, if my math is correct, all season long. Juniata finished the entire season 35-0, which is very impressive. And the scary thing is that Juniata wasn't even the number 1 seed overall. They were actually the number 2 seed in terms of the final 8 seed list. So Juniata basically had that Michael Jordan approach, and they said, and we took that personally. And I also have to give a shout out to Juniata's head coach, Heather Pavlik, who is the wife of Penn State men's volleyball coach Mark Pavlik, as he's a former Set Point guest. So huge shout to Heather Pavlik, who is a former Juniata player, and I think she wound up winning a national championship with Juniata back when she was a player. But she's really taken that program to greater heights. So huge shout to Heather Pavlik, and I hope she is able to take Juniata to even more greater heights in the near future. As, like I said, Juniata wound up sweeping Hope in the national championship 25-22, 25-20, and 25-21. It was a big win for Juniata, as Audrey Muth led the way with 11 kills, and they had 3 different players with 9 kills. So that's very impressive right there. If you're able to get that output from your players, then you got it made. And I imagine Mark Pavlik was one happy husband, and hopefully he and Penn State get that motivation for him to win the national championship in men's volleyball. Otherwise, Pavlik might be doing the dishes. I'm kidding. But great job to Heather Pavlik and Juniata for winning the NCAA Division III national championship. Let's discuss a little NCAA Division II. All right, so Division II, their championship is going to be this weekend. The final is going to be on December 9th, which is really cool, as their top 8 seeds consist of, well, the final 8 seed list consists of Tampa, which wound up winning the tournament a couple seasons ago, Missouri St. Louis, Wayne State, Nebraska, West Texas A&M, Clarion, Cal State Los Angeles, which is the college of one of my former guests, Taylor Kushner, Anderson of South Carolina, and Bentley. So I'm very familiar with Tampa, and like I said, they wound up winning the entire NCAA Division II women's volleyball tournament a couple seasons ago. That was when Tampa Bay was winning practically everything, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning, and then they wound up winning. And I was even calling Tampa Bay Title Town, but they're not Title Town as of this point. But I digress. They're still pretty good in terms of NCAA Division II women's volleyball. But Wayne State, you know why Wayne State? Nebraska is so special in terms of volleyball. And it's great that they have a pro team, and it's not just Nebraska, University of Nebraska, the Huskers, but it's also Creighton, which is from Omaha, Nebraska. Then you got Wayne State, a Division II school that's basically in the Final 8, which I think is really cool. And here's hoping for their sake. They have Cal State LA. If I were a betting man, and this is no disrespect to Cal State LA, I'd probably put my money on Wayne State, but this is the Final 8 and anything can happen. As Claremont Mudscripts kind of demonstrated that to Oshkosh in the Division III quarterfinal. But I wish I could go... The NCAA Division II Women's Volleyball Championship is basically like the NCAA Division III Women's Volleyball Championship. There are 8 regions, and if you win your region, you go to the Final 8, and then the selection committee seeds those top 8 teams. So you could be the worst team in probably your region, but then you could be getting promoted. It's pretty impressive, and vice versa. You could be the best team, and you're still not guaranteed to be the 1 seed, and you could be the best team in that Final 8, but you could also wind up losing in the quarterfinals. So, all in all, we're getting some really exciting matchups as Tampa, Bentley, I wouldn't call that the greatest matchup, but I really am interested in Wayne State versus Cal State LA. That is the matchup I really want to keep an eye on, as the quarterfinals are on December 7th, which is this Thursday. Semifinals are on Friday, the day after, and then the championship is on Saturday. So it's 3 straight days of volleyball, which I don't necessarily agree with. And all this is being taken place at the UPMC Event Center in Moon Township, Pennsylvania. But that's actually at the National Championship site. But anyway, the 8 advancing teams will advance to the final site, which will be seeded by the Division II Women's Volleyball Committee after completion of the regionals. And I'm guessing Moon Township, Pennsylvania is the final site. So, all in all, that's that for NCAA Division II and Division III. I wanted to give NCAA Division II and Division III some love just because I could just make this, like I said, this whole show could be all about Division I, but I want to show some love to Division II, Division III, NAIA, NJCAA, 3C2A, and high school, like I just did like a few weeks ago when Modern Day wound up winning it all. And, yeah. Alright. But that is that right there. Jumping over to some NAIA action. We actually have some NAIA volleyball going on right now. And it's basically... Now, this is a very, 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 very different format from the NCAA tournament. You have to have pool play. Yes, NAIA takes on the whole format of pool play. 24 teams get in, and then it's 8 pools of 3 teams. And then if you finish first in your pool, you go on to the quarterfinals. If you finish second or third, you're out. You're going home. Goodbye. Have a good season. Have a safe flight back, brother. Sista, whoever. Anyway, so Pool A was won by Northwestern of Iowa. Yes, Northwestern of Iowa, not Northwestern of Illinois. Then Pool B was won by Indiana Wesleyan. Pool C was won by Eastern Oregon. Pool D was actually won by... Yeah, if I'm... Midland. Yeah, Midland. Midland of Nebraska? Yeah, Midland of Nebraska. All these Nebraska teams are on one. It's not just Nebraska and Creighton. You've got Wayne State, and now you've got Midland. Anyway, so Pool E was won by Viterbo of Wisconsin. Pool F was won by Columbia. Pool G was won by Jamestown, the reigning NAIA champion, Jamestown of North Dakota. And then Pool H was won by Vanguard of California, which is actually near my neck of the woods, kinda, which is pretty cool if you ask me. I want to say this is Vanguard's first quarterfinal appearance since maybe 2017 or no 2016. I actually did go to some or was it 15? Either way, it was way back in those days. I actually went to Vanguard women's volleyball matches, and they were actually pretty good. I really liked the previous head coach, Erin Legia. She's now coaching at St. Catherine, by the way. Anyway, but those 8 teams that I just mentioned, Northwestern of Iowa, Vanguard, Midland, Viterbo, Indiana Wesleyan, Jamestown, Eastern Oregon, and Columbia, they all advanced to the quarterfinals. And then the quarterfinals were played on last Saturday as Northwestern took down Vanguard in 4 sets. Sad face for Vanguard, but Northwestern was the number 1 overall seed. And yeah, it was going to be an uphill climb from there. And then Viterbo took down Midland in 4 sets. No, I'm sorry, Nebraska fans. And then Indiana Wesleyan punched its first ever ticket to the semifinals, beating the reigning NAIA champion Jamestown in 4 sets. And then we got the only 5-setter of the quarterfinal, Eastern Oregon outlasting Columbia in 5 sets, which was pretty impressive. Currently going on right now are the NAIA women's volleyball semifinals. The first semifinal was actually decided as Northwestern punched its first ever ticket to the NAIA final as they wound up beating Viterbo in 4 sets, which, believe it or not, Northwestern was actually... Northwestern won the first 2 sets, and then Viterbo wound up winning the 3rd set in very close fashion, 27-25. Viterbo was actually up 13-8, and then Northwestern pulled out the reverse card, and they eventually kind of ran away with the set. They wound up winning the 4th set 25-19, and now they are 1 win away from the national championship in NAIA, or as what it's called, the Red Banner. But currently going on right now is Indiana Wesleyan and Eastern Oregon. It's the 1 seed, or the 2 seed versus the 3 seed as... Yeah, it's fun times right there, and I wish I was getting some constant updates from the matchup at hand, but sadly no one wants to update me because apparently people don't care too much about NAIA. But honestly, I will gladly talk NAIA volleyball, and I don't care what it takes. I will talk about it. And the final is tomorrow. Yeah, the final is, believe it or not, tomorrow. So the semifinals are today. The quarterfinals were Saturday. And then tomorrow is the championship. For the battle for the Red Banner. All right. And Mikey Two Guns is back. And Larry B popped into the chat room putting in 4 volleyball emojis. And yeah, I got to give credit to Larry B. He actually is part of the reason why I thought of this idea, because he and I host 3 and Out College Edition, and we talk all things college football. And Mikey Two Guns loves the NAIA updates. Yeah, and I want to give love to the NAIA as well as NCAA Division 3 and Division 2. But let's move on to some 3C2A women's volleyball, and I actually really wanted to cover some 3C2A women's volleyball, but unfortunately I had to cover the Big West Conference tournament, and sadly that kind of was more on my priority list. Just because. It was an inaugural thing. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Anyway, so in terms of the 3C2A, so they have a Southern California region and a Northern California region. Unfortunately, they do not have this in men's volleyball. All they just have is the Southern California region, but I digress. So the teams that came out of the Southern California region were San Diego Mesa, the top seed, Irvine Valley, the 4 seed, Ventura, the 2 seed, and Grossmont, the 3 seed. So all top 4 seeds did advance out of the Southern California bracket. Though Irvine Valley, I'll give credit to Irvine Valley, they had to grind this one out against Orange Coast, my alma mater, as IVC wound up beating OCC in 5 sets. So, credit to IVC. That was actually a rubber match, and they actually recently lost to OCC for the first time since 2012. But IVC wound up winning when it truly mattered, and I gotta give credit to OCC as well. They actually were the lowest seed that advanced farthest in the Southern California bracket and in the Northern California bracket, as the highest or the lowest seed that advanced through the lower side of the bracket of the 3C2A was a 9 seed, being Solano. But give credit to OCC, and I'll give credit to Santa Monica as well. They managed to grind one out against Cypress. So, yeah. So as for the Northern California side of things, San Joaquin Delta, the top seed, advanced, while American River, quote-unquote, upset Sierra I wouldn't call it the second round, but I'd call it the quarterfinals. And then Fresno City took down West Valley in 4 sets in the quarterfinals. And then Feather River swept Lassen in the other quarterfinal. So the final 8 was San Diego Mesa, Irvine Valley, Ventura, and Grossmont from Southern California. And then Feather River, Fresno City, San Joaquin Delta, and American River from Northern California. So on day 1 of the whole state tournament, Irvine Valley took down San Joaquin Delta in straight sets. Impressive win, because that actually, I think that might have been that was the bigger upset of the whole thing, because Irvine Valley was the 4 seed from the Southern California region, while San Joaquin Delta was the top seed. Then we had Feather River taking down Ventura in 4 sets, which is another little upset. Grossmont took down Fresno City in 4 sets, another upset. And then San Diego Mesa was the only team that wasn't upset, as they wound up sweeping American River. Then on semi-championship Saturday, or semifinal Saturday, we had Feather River taking on Irvine Valley, but Feather River wound up sweeping Irvine Valley, while San Diego Mesa and Grossmont had a nice little rivalry matchup. So if you know San Diego Mesa and Grossmont, they're both in the San Diego area, and if I recall correctly, they both play in the same conference. San Diego Mesa, however, did sweep Grossmont to advance to the 3C2A state championship, and that was actually played this past Sunday, aka yesterday, where San Diego Mesa swept Feather River 25-18, 25-23, and 25-17, which was very impressive if you ask me. And I was very impressed by them, as that's actually their first ever state title in school history. So I gotta give credit to San Diego Mesa's women's volleyball team, the Olympians. They won their first ever state championship, and they're on top of the ladder, saying, "Ain't nobody better." That's right. So great job to San Diego Mesa, and props to all the teams that made it. It was very impressive, but unfortunately there could only be one champion, and that was San Diego Mesa. Alright, so that's that for the 3C2A. Then you have the NJCAA. And the NJCAA is kind of tricky, just because there's Division 3, Division 2, and Division 1. And I want to say this is from Division 1. And in the Division 1, we have 3 champions. I talked about the other one, which was from Dallas, and then we had Florida Southwestern, the Florida Southwestern State defeating Miami-Dade College in 4 sets. Miami-Dade took the first set 25-19, but then Florida Southwestern took the next 3, 25-16, 25-19, and 25-18 to win the NJCAA championship. And it was a good win for them. And I want to say, and I was very impressed. I was rather impressed, if you ask me. And leading Florida Southwestern was Victoria Cibecci, who had 15 kills, while Vivian Lucami Catiel Altagracia Alonso Vargas. Oh my God, that's a mouthful. She had 16 kills. And then Florida Southwestern hit 292. So there was that right there. And congratulations to Florida Southwestern State College on winning the national championship, or the NJC championship. So there was another championship, as I want to say Division II saw Cowley winning the national championship, as this whole thing was, the whole NJCAA website is so tough to navigate through. It's like, why can't you just have a consistent, why can't your website just be consistent? I'm just saying, why can't it be like the NCAA website? But anyway, Cowley wound up winning the Division II, NJCAA Division II championship, as Rosanna Papa was the player of the year. She's actually a setter, and she actually hails from Italy, which is pretty nice, pretty good, not bad. As she was named the tournament MVP, and her team wound up winning the NJCAA Division II championship. And honestly, I have to give credit to all these teams that wound up making it. It's just that the website is just so tough. Again, it's very tough to navigate through, and I see why most people kind of forget about them, which is sad, because I think all volleyball teams should be celebrated for their accomplishments. But it is what it is, but I will gladly make note of it, as Stephen Graham was named the Coach of the Year. And I need to mention Cowley. So Cowley was actually completed an undefeated season, as they hail from Kansas, as they actually wound up winning the national championship, as they wound up winning it in 5 sets, as they wound up finishing with a perfect 41-0, which is very impressive. I am flabbergasted by that, as they beat Scottsdale of Arizona in 5 sets. So, man, you talk about a heartbreaking way to end the season, but a historic way to win the national championship, as the 5th set was decided 18-16. The first set was won by Cowley, 25-9. Second set was won by Scottsdale, 25-23. Cowley won the third set, 25-18, and then vice versa for Scottsdale in set 4. But then in set 5, Cowley was able to win that 5th set, 18-16. And Scottsdale actually was the runner-up, as they too were undefeated going into this match. So both teams were a combined 40. They were combined 67-0, but only one team can win the national championship, and that was wound up won by Cowley of Kansas. So congratulations to Cowley, and congratulations to both teams on a hard-fought national championship. And I will just say, please improve your website, NJCAA. I want to give you the proper credit. Give us a actual tournament bracket, so we could all have like a March Madness type of thing for the NJCAA. Just please. All right, but that's going to do it for the NJCAA. I got to show them some love as well. All right, but now let's circle back to some NCAA Division I women's volleyball. So, breaking down the matchups for the Sweet 16, or the regional semifinals, as you cool kids like to call it. First up, going from top to bottom, we have Nebraska versus Georgia Tech. All right. Nebraska, on paper, this looks like Nebraska's going to win this one, but do not underestimate Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has some pretty good hitters in Tamara Otene and Bianca Bertolino. I think those two can maybe try to will Georgia Tech to victory. Obviously, I'm picking Nebraska to win this one. And yes, I'm going to make my picks. I'm picking Nebraska over Georgia Tech in this round of 16 matchup. If I get this wrong, you all can quote me on it. Next up, we have Arkansas versus Kentucky. All right, I love me some Jill Gillen. She is a phenomenal player, but honestly, it's so tough to pick against Kentucky. And I was also featured on Cats Talk Wednesday, a Kentucky podcast courtesy of former Set Point guests Vinny Hardy and Terry Brown, or as I call him, Terry TB Brown. But anyway, for Kentucky, Arkansas, it's tough to beat a team 3 times in one season, but when you're Kentucky, you are basically on a blistering hot start. They are like a runaway train that is not going to be slowing down. But I will just say, don't expect this to be a walk in the park. I would not be surprised if Arkansas threw everything in the kitchen sink at Kentucky, because this is basically the last hurrah for most of those Arkansas seniors. But I gotta pick Kentucky just because they're just on a roll. They are a very hot team, and don't be surprised if they manage to give Nebraska, if everything holds up, a little bit of a tough matchup. I'm not saying Kentucky would beat Nebraska, but I'm saying Kentucky is playing some dang good volleyball. I almost cursed now, didn't I? But I didn't. All right, next up we have Louisville versus Creighton. Like I said earlier, don't be surprised if Louisville gets a little bit of a tough matchup against the Blue Jays. With Creighton now fully healthy with Nora Sis, they have Ava Martin, and they have Bickelmeyer as a third option. Creighton is going to be a tough out for Louisville. I'm not saying Louisville is going to lose, but Creighton is going to be such a tough matchup. I'm taking Louisville, but I would not be surprised if this one went 5. And by the way, Nebraska is hosting the regionals for the first one and the first part, and on day 1 and day 2. They're hosting the regional semifinals and they're hosting the final. So even if Nebraska gets knocked out or any host gets knocked out, they're hosting the regionals regardless. Anyway, so Louisville over Creighton in a thriller. Next up, we have Washington State taking on Pitt. Both of those matchups will be played at Fitzgerald Fieldhouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All right, so Pittsburgh, Washington State, I would not be surprised if that one went 5. I think these are two semi-evenly matched teams. Pitt is kind of a little on the young side, but those young players kind of grew up. My only concern for Pitt is this. Olivia Babcock kind of has to have her big game. I know she struggled in the first 2 matches of the NCAA tournament, but that's probably because of maybe freshman jitters of the NCAA tournament. This is her first ever NCAA tournament that she's playing in, but not the biggest stage she's played in. She also has played in the CIF Southern Section Finals, where Sierra Canyon wound up beating Mira Costa. Sorry to bring that up, Mira Costa fans. But for Pitt, they have to ride the hot hand of Olivia Babcock. Valeria Vasquez-Gomez also can step up, and Chimaka Nakolo needs to also bring her A game, as well as Emma Monks. Rachel Fairbanks does an excellent job of setting those players, and if Pitt serves tough, I don't know if Washington State can keep up. Now, Washington State, on the other hand, they are a great blocking team. Magda the Magnificent is just straight up awesome, but it's going to need to be a well-balanced effort all around. I'm going to take Pitt to win this one, but I expect Washington State to throw everything at Pitt and more. Next up, we head down to Madison, Wisconsin, as Wisconsin hosts Penn State in the Wisconsin Regional. All right, round 3 between these two teams. Last time these two teams played, Penn State wound up winning in 4 sets, but Wisconsin didn't have Anna Smrek. Here's my thing. If Wisconsin plays Wisconsin volleyball like they did in the first round, then in the first 2 rounds, I don't think they're going to be losing to Penn State. Now, Penn State has, I did not know this, they have 10-plus seniors or 10-plus seniors / 5-year players. So this is kind of Penn State's last gasp of possibly being a contender. Not that I don't think they'll be a contender going forward, but I will just say this. I got to pick Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is playing some of its best volleyball as of late, and Anna Smrek being back only helps out Sarah Franklin, who, again, she has a phenomenal story, and then it's back to the 6-2 offense for Wisconsin, and Julia Orzel, she's back in her primary libero position. So you got to give me Wisconsin. Not trying to discredit Penn State, but it's just so tough to pick against a Wisconsin team that's playing lights out for the most part. Next up, we have Purdue and Oregon. All right, this is a tricky matchup. Oregon, okay, friend of the show, Robert Evans, says Oregon plays fast. But I will say this. Purdue also has the three-headed monster in Raven Colvin, Chloe Chicoine, and Eva Hudson. While I do think Purdue is young and they're probably 1 or 2 years away, maybe, you got to also consider this. Oregon has had its inconsistencies, and Purdue, I think, has hit its level of consistency where I think they are playing their best volleyball. Is it enough to win in this matchup? It all depends. But I'm going to go bold here, and I'm going to say Purdue upsets Oregon. Yes, y'all, I put that down in my bracket. Purdue upsets Oregon. I have to pick some sort of chaos, and this is probably the biggest mistake of my volleyball IQ, but you don't want to underestimate Purdue. I have ridden Purdue, and I have knocked Purdue quite a bit. I've said they are this up and down team, but now I think they've hit their ups more so than their downs, and the win over Wisconsin was one of their big wins, although it was without Anna Smrek. But Purdue, the good thing is that they don't have to go to Eugene, Oregon. They know what it's like to be playing in Madison, Wisconsin. So for me, I feel Purdue is going to have just enough in the tank to take down Oregon. Would I be surprised if Oregon wound up winning? No. And next up, we have the Stanford Regional, as we have Texas versus Tennessee. All right, so I've been getting a lot of... when I posted my bracket on X, I got some responses saying Tennessee is going to beat Texas. And some actually have Tennessee beating Texas. All I got to say is, did you forget that Texas is the reigning national champion? I will just say, nothing against Tennessee, but I think Texas has a little bit more firepower with Asia O'Neal, Maddie Skinner, Jenna Wenas when she's on her A game, Bella Bergmark, and then their freshman setter has been setting them up for success. I think Emma Halter also looks a little bit more comfortable in terms of the libero position. Remember, this is her first ever this is her first year at the libero position, as she is taking over for a generational talent in, I forget the last name, but it's Zoe. It's Zoe something. I'm blanking on the last name, and I should know this because she's from Granada, from the Los Angeles area. Granada Charter. Regardless, I got Texas winning. I would not be surprised if Tennessee battled against Texas, but Texas is just so good. I can't pick against Texas. I would be very surprised if Texas wound up losing this one. And some are saying Tennessee is going to have Texas on upset alert, but I will only believe it when I see it. And if Tennessee does beat Texas, I will gladly eat my crow. And then lastly, we have Arizona State versus Stanford. All right, well, this is round 3 between these two teams, as I forgot to mention that Stanford, Arizona State, as well as Wisconsin, Penn State, and Arkansas, Kentucky are rematches of conference play, and Arizona State, Stanford, and then Penn State, Wisconsin are rubber matches, while Arkansas, Kentucky is basically round 3. But for Arizona State, Stanford, obviously I have Stanford winning. I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. Stanford is winning. That being said, do not underestimate the likes of Arizona State. I think Arizona State is on fire, and that's the biggest concern I have for Stanford. If Stanford lets Marta Levinska get hot, it's going to be a long match. And the former libero from last year was Zoe Fleck. So yeah, my apologies to all the Texas fans probably screaming, "It's Zoe Fleck!" So Zoe Fleck was last year's libero for Texas and taking over as Emma Halter. But back to Stanford, Arizona State. Those two, I would not be surprised if Stanford won in a very close fashion, but I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona State pulled an upset. Arizona State is on fire, and beating the likes of BYU and Georgia in straight sets, it's not easy. It's so tough to win in Provo. And for Arizona State to just basically sweep them away with practically not too much effort, it's pretty good if you ask me. So I'm still taking Stanford, but I will gladly eat my crow if Arizona State winds up beating Stanford. And I won't be surprised if that happens. And that is it for my Sweet 16 picks. I will also make my picks for the Elite 8, and I'm probably going to get... I'm going to be pissing off one fan base. But on that note, I actually do want to give a shout out to Carson, who has been in the chat room for Set Point. He says, "This is the best time of the year for volleyball. I am loving hearing who your picks are." And thanks. And yeah, so my picks, just to recap, from top to bottom, are Nebraska, Kentucky, Louisville, Pitt, Wisconsin, Purdue, Texas, and Stanford. And that's basically my bracket right there. And then, and that's pretty much that for everything of the NCAA tournament for the Sweet 16. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. I know it was a longer episode than last week, that's for sure. But it is time to drop that beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. Wait. One more thing. If you haven't gotten the 5th set on ESPN Plus, I suggest getting it. You got to get it. It is for all volleyball fans like myself. Last year, I didn't have it, and I am utterly regretting it. But now I have it, as well as ESPN Plus. This is probably going to be a minimum time thing, just because I don't want to pay $10.99 for basically it sitting around. But regardless, get ESPN Plus, watch the 5th set, support that. We need the 5th set for NCAA men's volleyball season. I'm going to petition for that, and even if it means I have to do the 5th set myself and get some volleyball IQ like Nick England. But anyway, redrop that beat again. Alright, but thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I appreciate you. Thank you to everyone who endures me live tweeting these matches on X or live posting these matches on X. I really do appreciate it. If I flood your feed, I apologize, but I have to give my opinion on what is happening. Huge shout to the chat room. Mikey Two Guns, thank you for stopping by. He asked what part of Cali. Never call it Cali, Mikey. California am I in? I'm in Orange County. Carson popped into the chat room. He's one of my big fans of Set Point. Larry B, Patty Backs, Davidson Crooks, and Marcus Lostrait for popping in. I really do appreciate y'all tuning in, and it's all good. Carson says, "Sorry, I usually can't listen live, but I always download your show." Aw, thanks, man. That really makes my day. And thank you to Larry B. He says, "Great show, man." I appreciate it. I am happy to talk about all things college volleyball, even if it's like the lower divisions. But until then, have yourself a great rest of the week. I will be back this week for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Enjoy the volleyball action, and I will see you maybe Thursday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Peace!